Hey, welcome back to Inside Gaming. You may have seen headlines lately along the lines of Nintendo PlayStation sells for nearly $400,000 and had more than a few questions pop into your head.
Yeah, things like, what is a Nintendo PlayStation? Why would any console sell for nearly $500,000? Does this thing even work or play games? What rich weirdo bought this thing?
I mean, that's a question as old as time. What rich weirdo bought this thing or would buy this thing? It goes from Nintendo, Sony, whatevers to rhino horn dust. And those are all great questions, especially because Nintendo PlayStation sounds like something an out-of-touch grandmother would try and buy for their grandchild at Christmas.
Yeah, so today we're going to answer all those questions and more when we take a look at the short-lived and ill-fated partnership between two of gaming's biggest players.
Star-crossed companies. Do you want to break that down for me?
Yeah, the creation of the Nintendo PlayStation stems from the video game crash of 1983. The crash primarily affected American hardware manufacturers and game developers, while the Japanese industry was amidst a transition to home consoles and away from arcades. The gaming industry's value of $42 billion dropped to a measly $14 billion by 1985, but it was the continued efforts and successes of Nintendo that would push gaming to reclaim its former glory, and by 1990, the industry was back to a healthy value of about $30 billion and rising.
Oh, thank goodness. It was during this time that then Sony engineer Ken Kutaragi developed an interest in video games, mostly due to his daughter's enjoyment of Nintendo's Famicom/NES. Seeing value in the reviving industry, Kutaragi took on a contract through Sony to work on Nintendo's next console, the Super Famicom SNES. Specifically, Kutaragi worked on the Sony SPC 700 audio chip, which would go on to become the core of the SNES's SSMP audio system. So Sony as a whole wasn't keen on jumping into the video game industry, but Kutaragi gained the support of an executive, Norio Oga, who encouraged the deal to move forwards. So, hey, thank you Sony for making the musical capabilities of the SNES possible, with such classics as...
Because of the Super Nintendo's success, Nintendo decided to pursue a more lucrative partnership with Sony to create a CD-based add-on for the system to help compete with their biggest rivals, the Sega Genesis and the TurboGrafx 16. And here's where things get messy. At this point, Sony were the only ones capable of producing the SNES's sound chip and solidified itself as a necessity to continue production of Nintendo's current generation console. And by allowing Sony to become a bigger partner in the production of this CD add-on, Nintendo would be leaving themselves more vulnerable if the deal ever soured. A lot of these fears came from then president of Nintendo, Hiroshi Yamauchi, who saw that Nintendo would lose their hold on the market if Sony were able to fully realize the potential of this device. Sony was already raking in serious cash because developers needed to license proprietary software to develop audio for the Super Nintendo's SSMP audio chip, and would gain an even more controlling hand and profits once this Super NES CD-ROM system was released.
So, rather than attempting to renegotiate their contract, Yamauchi told the heads of Nintendo of America and Europe to approach Sony's biggest rival at the time, Philips, with an offer to develop the device instead. Essentially, Nintendo was in a relationship with Sony, but having Philips be their side piece. No, Philips, of course you're my first choice. I'll break up with Sony soon. We just have to keep it on the DL a little longer. And if you've ever watched daytime dramas, you can pretty much tell where this story is going.
According to an anonymous industry consultant interviewed for David Sheff's Game Over, quote, Sony had Nintendo by the balls. It was not a tenable position as far as Hiroshi Yamauchi was concerned. The Philips deal was meant to do two things at once: give Nintendo back its stranglehold on software and gracefully fuck Sony.
That sounds animalistic.
What does gracefully fuck mean? What does that entail?
If you take a look to your right. You take a look to your left. There, you can dub
See,
that
you
in.
say take a look to my right, and there's Brian.
Oh no, the Austin verse. So Sony, meanwhile, were progressing with the development of this Super NES CD-ROM system, which they had dubbed the Nintendo PlayStation. This console could be a moderate upgrade to the base SNES with a faster CD-ROM speed than the competitors, but ultimately would be less powerful than the Sega CD. God, names used to suck ass to like say.
Oh yeah, it's just, let's make it as long and as painful as possible to say. It's like anime titles today.
Right, but if they were just acronyms with letters that you have to pronounce individually. NES is that vowel in the middle? Terrible. At this point, Sony was fairly confident in their product and were looking forward to formally announcing the deal and product at the 1991 CES show, bringing development kits of the new system to the show floor and focusing a lot of their efforts at the event to boast of the new potential this new product had. Sony was living large, and CES is in Vegas, so they were probably hitting the tables and winning big, baby. They were confident.
Yeah, that is until the very next day when Nintendo had their press conference at the event. Nintendo of America chairman Howard Lincoln stated, quote, "Our engineers reached the conclusion that from a technical standpoint, it was better for Nintendo to work with Philips," which was total BS, by the way. Nintendo's deal with Sony allowed the latter to profit off of the sale of the discs and locked all companies aiming to develop for the console into purchasing their discs from Sony and only Sony. However, according to Eben Shapiro, in his New York Times article chronicling the event, quote, "In its deal with Philips, Nintendo kept the right to buy compact disc players from a company other than Philips. One clear benefit to Philips is that the games designed for the system, which carry Nintendo's name, could be played on the new Philips Interactive Compact Disc Player, a product that blends computer and television use." This is where this whole thing turns from the daytime drama allegory into The Incredibles. Nintendo essentially said,
"Fly home, buddy. I work alone."
Which caused Sony to go from Nintendo fanboy to bitter rival in no time flat.
I learned an important lesson. You can't count on anyone.
And directly after a meeting which detailed Sony's plans to file a lawsuit against Nintendo for breaking their deal, Norio Ogo was quoted as saying, "We will never withdraw from this business. Keep going." That's awesome. Meaning Nintendo had, by backing out of this deal, inadvertently created their next big rival. So that's cool and all, like really cool, that's awesome. And it does answer the what the heck is the Nintendo PlayStation question, so how do we get from that to a prototype selling for nearly $500,000?
Yeah, well, some of the Nintendo PlayStations were still roaming around at the times in the hands of executives. One of those was owned by Sony Computer Entertainment Incorporated founder Olaf Olofsson, which Olofsson held onto even after he left SCEI for a board position at Advanta Corporation. Advanta went belly up in 2009, and lo and behold, Olofsson had left his precious Nintendo PlayStation prototype behind, which allowed the device to be put up for auction during the Advanta bankruptcy auction.
It was acquired by Terry Diebold, a former Advanta employee, when he placed the winning bid of $75 on the lot auction. Skip ahead to 2015, and after Diebold and his son posted pictures of the device on Reddit, it soon found its way into the loving hands of the console modding and emulation communities. And by the time 2017 rolled around, both communities had tracked down a boot disc for the console, created various homebrew titles, and thanks to everyone's favorite console modder, Benjamin Heckendorn, got the prototype up and running, that's super cool, and we totally recommend taking a look at Heckendorn's breakdown videos featuring the Nintendo PlayStation. Diebold was actively touring around the world with this thing due to its fame and rarity, but losing money every time he did.
Yeah, Diebold said, quote, "I can't keep losing money. I've put a lot of work into this by traveling with it, and we have made nothing on it. Every trip that we have taken with it has cost us money out of pocket. So just because you own something rare and cool doesn't mean it will benefit you in any way." There's a good lesson in there somewhere, I'm sure. So in February of 2020, tired of losing money on shuttling this piece of video game history around like a glorified Uber, Diebold put the Nintendo PlayStation up for auction.
Heritage Auctions, which hosted the item sale, talked briefly about it, saying, "It's definitely going to sell and the market will determine the value. In the case of this particular item, since it's never been sold at public auction before, there's really no way to tell." And it sold for $360,000. Holy shit, that's a lot of coin. Being purchased by Greg McLemore.
McLemore is the former owner of websites like Toys.com and Pets.com, a real estate and tech entrepreneur, and a self-titled classic video game collector. He had previously actually offered Diebold $100,000 for the system a few years before, but Diebold had decided not to sell at that point. So that about answers everything. But before we go, we want to mention that prior to all this, Diebold mentioned that he had been offered over $1 million for the device, saying, quote, "We turned down $1.2 million from someone in Norway because after taxes, splitting the rest with his son, and paying off debt, he'd pretty much end up with nothing." Which, dude, you made less than half that, and you'll have to pay taxes on it anyway. So what the hell, man? If Indecent Proposal has taught us anything, you always take the million. That was the point of that movie, right?
It's absolutely bang on. I'm a big fan, and I'm just gonna keep going until I'm told to stop.
Please stop.
Moving a little bit, Autumn told me to stop. And so, that is my cue. You probably already know that we're on the eve of the next console generation with the Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5 set to hit retail this holiday season. Everyone's foaming at the mouth and writing 50,000 opinion pieces trying to stave off the pre-console winter. Us included. Our next video, 13 things the PS5 probably will not look like.
For all of you geniuses in there saying slow news